Hello, everyone. Welcome again. And you're watching Afghanistan by Afghans, where you get to meet some amazing Afghans every week or every other week or every month, however often I get to record these. Think of this series as an oral history project, because that's what one professor called me the other day and said, this is what it is. You're doing an oral history project of recording all the histories of Afghans living in diaspora. So today we have a oral history for you from Matin Mawlawizadah. I was trying to pronounce it. Even for a Persian speaker, the last name is pretty hard to pronounce or long. And I was just asking him after I mentioned his name, that is anybody a Mawlawi in his family? A Mawlawi is somebody who actually memorizes the Quran and recites it. So, and he said it's his grandfather. So why don't we, Matin John, start from that? Tell us a little bit about your grandfather.
My grandfather, well, I've never met him. Unfortunately, he was gone by the time I was born. First of all, it's an honor to be on your show. Thank you so much. I'm a big fan, and I've been watching your videos for quite a while now. So I really appreciate you having me on here. But about my grandfather, he fought the war in Bukhara when the Amir fled, and he basically was there for a while, ruling in a way, because there was no leaders, and he was fighting. He actually, if you look at, we had his sword, his shamsher, at home, and it was on the wall. It was the one that he fought with. So he fought I don't remember, it was the Russian army or the Tsar army, but it was during that history when Russia was taking over Bukhara and Samarkand. And his father was from Bukhara, and he fought that war. His father actually was martyred there, and he's still buried in Bukhara. But he came to Panjshir Valley, and then from there to Kabul. He was imprisoned by Amanullah Khan for a while because of disobedience and fighting. Okay. And then he was released later and became some kind of official, some kind of a public official, which I can't remember the exact post that he was doing. Mm-hmm. But then he was in Kabul. He was fairly progressive. He made sure my dad went to medical school, although he studied his preliminary studies was in Islamic studies, and then he ended up going to Lycée Habibia, and then from there to medical school, and he became a professor in medical school. My grandmother was a teacher in Lycée, what was it called?
The high school, right?
In high school, yeah, Rabbi Balkhi, which was like, they were one of the first group of women that were teaching in their age. And her cousin actually went to Turkey, was one of the first female scholars that actually got scholarship to go and study at the university in Turkey. So it came from that kind of a background. I came from that kind of a background. And so my grandfather, my paternal grandfather side were Sufis, devoted to Beidel, and my mother's side, they were devoted to Rumi. So it was really amazing watching them recite poetry and cry and talk, and it was just really magical time at that time.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, you threw a bunch of information which I'm not going to dissect. Well, first of all, what period are we talking about when your mother and father were teachers and medical doctors in Kabul?
So this was I was born in 1964, so this was in the 50s and 60s. My dad was already a doctor by the time. He was already established by the time I was born. But they were the first group of people that were modernizing with work, taking off the veils, walking with their face showing. So all of that was very new for their generation. At one point, I don't remember what year it was, but it was probably in the 50s, late 50s, maybe early 50s, that all the government officials had to have their wives present in certain functions, and they were supposed to show up without veil. And that was like one of the first group that went to these parties not only without veil, but with Western clothing and, Western style hair and, all of that. I mean, it's a very loaded thing, which is
forced modernization. That's right. Yeah. If that's a term for it, but yeah. I'm curious. You mentioned about your mother being a teacher and her family. You mentioned two different poets.
My grandmother was a teacher.
Your grandmother. Sorry, your grandmother. And you were talking about their families being connected to poetry. And poetry is one of those cultural artifacts of the Afghan culture and that sub-region in general, where people like just love poetry. And it's a very cultural, as you know, it has to be explained to cultures that don't necessarily have poetry as like everyday phenomena, where people would be sitting around food and eating, and then they would go and say, okay, now let's read some poetry, right? I want to hear, I wanted to hear some of your experiences with that, if you have any.
Well, it's that, or it's also like you're having a conversation and all of a sudden a poem pop in your head, and that pertains to the subject that you're discussing. And then you explain it so much better and with so much more color when you add, a couple of verses of poetry that is really profound and beautiful. And it's so much higher than the way we would normally discuss a subject or express something. When it comes in a poem, it's so much more powerful, of course, especially with poetry from our region where we grew, like Urdu or Farsi poetry is really powerful and meaningful. So it was that when I was a kid, I would be sitting and people would be talking and they would just throw a verse of, Rumi or Bidel or whatever. I grew up, since I was a child, I would be dragged into Ustad Rahim Bakhsh and Ustad Sarang's concerts, and we would go all night during Ramadan till like 3 or 4 in the morning, and then would come home and eat breakfast and go to sleep. And that was like a normal thing. It was, for the 30 days, there would be these recitals of poetry, which is in case of this, it was a concert, but it wasn't really a concert. It was more of a poetry recital,
meditation,
and meditation, prayers, all of that. So it was that was Kabul in the 70s. Really, if you had access to those things, it was pure magic for people that had access to it. Again, it wasn't the case for everyone, sadly. But for people that had access to it and had the opportunity to experience it, it was pretty amazing.
And at what age did you leave Afghanistan?
I was 17. I came here for college.
Oh, wonderful! So you got to experience it up to like adult age. Then you really got.
Oh yeah, it was. We left after Russian invasion. It was 2 years after, so it was.
So tell me a little bit about that journey of leaving Afghanistan, the why. It's pretty common, probably we all know the why, but if there is any specific whys, and then where did you end up in the US?
Yeah, well, for my family, it was the scariest part was I was finishing high school. I literally left the day before my high school exams, and but I went to a French high school so I could have paperwork later from the French embassy to apply for colleges and all of that. So it was one of those situations that, okay, I'm finishing high school. You're not allowed to go to college unless you go to the army. It was either joining the army or the resistance. And I really didn't want either of them. And neither, of course, my family didn't want either. A lot of my cousin ended up fighting with the Mujahideen, but I didn't. So my dad basically paid off everyone, like so much bribe, just to get me and my mother out to New Delhi alone. Didn't speak the language. It was a tough journey. It was so we ended up in India, and then a week later he sent my 2 younger sisters to India. And then from there, we applied for the visa in the United States. My sister was already living in California. She applied for us and sponsored us. And we ended up in Northern California, in Alameda.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
And how long were you in India?
6 months.
6 months. Okay. So a short journey. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
It was short. Yeah.
Yeah,
we got lucky.
yeah, exactly. I was going to say very lucky, because people in that transition period is anywhere between 2 years to 10 years before you.
Oh yeah, I mean, people.
migrate to
My
another.
cousins were in Pakistan forever. I mean, they finally
Yeah.
came in like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And so here you are now. You came to California, obviously, kind of almost as an adult now, since you're 18 by this time, probably, right? And
Yeah.
definitely, a lot of people I've spoken to on this show has also been, they were either born here or came early. You're one of the few, I would say, that has had such a big chunk of their lives in Afghanistan. So how does one kind of merge identities at that point of time when you're already like 18? You've come into a new culture. What was that experience like for you?
It was painful to. It was. There was always this conversation of denying my roots and modernizing myself into this, to live in America and exist here and survive it, or either denying that or just living like that and not being able to take advantage of what the US had to offer. And it was almost like, it felt like a betrayal to choose one and not the other. It was a tough transition. So there was a lot of, inner search, a lot of, inner debate within my heart, my mind, seeing what I should do and which way I should go. It took a while, and it was a lot of conversation between myself and my God. And it was like, what do you want me to do? Like, why am I here? I didn't choose to be here. I didn't want to be here. I didn't speak a word of English when I came to America. It's, I went to a French high school as a second language. I studied German. America was never in the equation. And when we left, I thought we were going to leave for a few months and then come back to Kabul, and I would go to university there. But I think most of the Afghans that left Afghanistan at that time felt that way. We really didn't think we were going to be here for so long. I remember always saying that I've been in America for 6 years, and I realized that it's been 30 years once. But every time somebody asked me, I always said 6 years.
Wow.
Because, once I got into college, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to college, and then I'm going to go to medical school and go back to Afghanistan. But, that day never arrived until the Taliban were ousted the first time around. And then that was the first time that I went back home. But it wasn't home anymore, It changed so much.
Yeah, would love to hear how that experience was when you went back. And in what ways had it changed? In what ways was it similar?
I mean, fundamentally, the culture had changed completely in Kabul. It was, Kabul in the 70s, in the 80s, it was very hospitable. It was very progressive. It was modern. It was kind. Then you go back and, this is like everybody that came back from Pakistan and from Arab countries and, neighboring countries. They were used to getting bribes, and bribery was like openly asked for every single thing, every single application, like including getting a cell phone. You had to bribe somebody to get a number. I mean, it was maddening. Fundamentally changed because that there's a word in Farsi, I don't know if you know it or not. They say ghurur afghani. That dignity was gone. Like people literally, that dignity was gone. It was just not there anymore. People didn't have the same feeling anymore. Only children had the same. And there was a beautiful little incident that I started a project in Afghanistan called Afghan Hands. It was a literacy program for women in embroidery. So these little, one time I remember coming from Bazaar and I bringing like 30 bags of little plastic bags in my hands. I got out of the cab and the kids were playing football, and they all stopped and they came and asked me, if they could help me bring the stuff up, and they all pitched in and they all brought the bags up like that. You don't get that anywhere else in the world. It's, for children to stop and help somebody up the stairs. So it was that kind of sweetness that still exists in the younger generation. And I hope that it will become again what we used to have.
Wow. And how long did you stay in Afghanistan?
The first time I stayed for almost a month.
Okay.
And then I would go like 3 or 4 times a year just to check on the project and the progress and all of that.
Yeah. And this project I actually did not know about. So do tell me a little bit more about this project of yours.
Well, the reason we started it was I really wanted to go back when Taliban were gone. And I stopped reading the news about Afghanistan and everything when I remember, I was working at a lab in South San Francisco at that time. I read an article of women committing suicide by throwing themselves from the buildings because this was during the Mujahideen war. Like one faction was raping the other women. Like Tajiks would be raping Pashtuns, Pashtuns would raping Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hazaras. So there was a lot of this happening. And of course they were murdering each other, but at the same time, they were literally like raping women. And this was kind of like using women as a weapon. They were weaponizing their honor and their existence. And when I read that, I was like, every time I prayed, my first word was, God forgive me and help Mujahideen win. And this was the Mujahideen that I prayed for were literally raping the country. It broke my heart. And I said, okay, this is not my people. I don't know these people. I don't want to know anything unless I can go and do something in Afghanistan. So I literally turned a blind eye for decades, just didn't read any paper. Anything that said Afghanistan, I would just like completely ignore because it disabled me. I literally couldn't go to work for like 3 or 4 days. So when the Taliban went out, and the U.S. promised so much, as we know that it was all a lie, but unfortunately we all bought it and we celebrated it. I wanted to go back. A group of my friends went there as sightseeing in a way and assessing to see what opportunity was there to start new businesses or work. I didn't want to start a new business. I didn't want to do a profitable business at that time. I'm not a business kind of minded person, but I wanted to do an education program. And I knew there were a lot of women that weren't able to go to school during the war. And then after that, Taliban didn't let them to go to school. So there were a lot of adult women that needed literacy. And my goal was to start a literacy program, a numeracy program, just to bring them up to like a grade 6. And then from there, we can apply and have them go to regular schools, which happened. And it was amazing because when Kabul was liberated the first time around, you would see children in a classroom with adult women. So there was a very mixed group of ages in schools. So we were bringing them up to a point that they could actually take the entrance exam for school and get into a certain grade. And then from there, we would support them like a scholarship almost. Right. But they had to, but we had conditions. The one thing that I saw in Afghanistan was that our dignity was taken away from us, whether we were abroad getting help from the UN or the welfare system in America or in Afghanistan. Everybody was looking for handouts and our hands were just always like open to receive. And I didn't want to break anybody else's spirits the way I've seen it broken around the world. So my condition was that, they have to earn their living and they have to earn their scholarship. So they had to pass their exam and show us that they actually passed it, or we would examine them. And then once they passed the exam, they would get the stipend for the education. And then for embroidery work, I didn't care if the embroidery was good or bad. I basically had a bunch of antique textiles that I took to them. I said, this is what I like. If you can make it, great, make it. I'm telling you, the first box that came in, I wept, I cried. I've never seen anything more beautiful than that. They did such a good job. I'm getting emotional thinking about it. But these women were amazing. They were so resilient. I'll show you an example of their work.
This is great. This is going to be a treat.
They made things like this.
Oh, wow.
So it was very colorful at the beginning. And I remember...
We'll put it up a little bit more. Let me take a look at let us all take a look. Wow, look at that. Yeah.
I've collected these for years. But then when I went back, I wanted them to make it. And so they started making it very sad and somber at first. It was all just in shades of browns and shades of cream, but nothing alive. And then I told them to make it a little bit brighter, and then they made it too bright with so many colors that it was impossible to market in a way. And the way it became a marketable thing was that they made it into scarves. I knew that we didn't have the capacity to buy machines or export machines to Afghanistan so they could make proper clothing. And since I was already in fashion industry, I knew how important it was to, like, the seams had to be perfect for a store to carry it. And you have to have labels. I mean, those are the things that was, in Kabul, we didn't even have electricity in 2004. So I remember somebody asking me, what it takes, why the scarves were so expensive, and why. And I basically said, you have no idea what it takes to make one scarf over there, because it was so dusty in Kabul. There were no electricity, so whatever power that was coming to every house was done by generators, these gas generators that were not. They were not unleaded, they were leaded gas. So people have like serious respiratory problems, heart problems because of the pollution. Kabul, when I left, was the cleanest air I've ever experienced. Right now, I live in the middle of oak trees. And even then, even here in East Hampton, I don't have that air that Kabul had. It was the most beautiful air I've ever. It wasn't just because I loved Afghanistan. It was because truly it was clean. There was not a lot of cars. There was no industry. It was just beautiful, clean, everything. Our buses were electric. So pollution was like hardly there. And then when I went back, you couldn't even breathe. You literally had to like cover your face with a scarf in order to breathe properly. So in order to keep the scarves clean, they had to put it in plastic bags and take a little bit out at a time so it doesn't get dirty and smelly. And they would do the embroidery like one flower at a time, and then the rest of it was in the plastic bag. And it's like in natural light, but they, the windows in Afghanistan are tiny. They don't have floor-to-ceiling windows in abundant light over there because, women working in these spaces. So, it's very hard for the eyes. And then on top of it, once they finished, they had to hand wash everything and hang dry it in a room so it doesn't get dusty inside a room. Once it dried, there were no electricity, so they would put their iron on top of fire, and then they would iron it from the backside of this car. I mean, it was just, you have no idea the labor it takes to make something by hand. And these people were like, oh, they're too expensive. Why are you making it so expensive? I'm like, because I want to pay them.
Yeah. And how many years did this go for?
For a very long time, from 2014, and we stopped right before COVID, like a year before COVID.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So until 2018.
Okay, that's a long time. Yeah.
Anytime it's still an entity. We would still be doing something, but it's not just because we were scattered and COVID just completely changed everything. We'll go back, inshallah, and we'll do something else with literacy. But it was a very promising project. So we made these beautiful scarves, and it became. I mean, it was in People magazine. It was in Anderson Cooper show 360 and CNN. They did a spot on CNN Heroes, which was really scary for me because there's no way I'm not that person. But they made me look really good in that. So it was that kind of it had a buzz that was unparalleled. And the first celebrity that wore it was Angelina Jolie. And her picture was in People magazine, and then all of a sudden we sold $29,000 in like 2 weeks, which funded the next, literally the next year of the project, because $29,000 in Afghanistan is huge.
A lot, yeah.
So at that time we started with when I left Afghanistan the first time we had 5 women working with us, and then by the time I left, the second time we had 40 women, and at one point we had 200 women working with us.
Right. Okay. Wow.
100 in Kabul and 100 in Jalalabad.
That's wonderful. That's a huge number. And that was, I was going to ask you exactly how many people are active in that. I'm going to come back to the project, but for context purposes, because even in my introduction, we went to your grandfather. I wanted to get to your background a little bit, which is in fashion and makeup and such. Do tell me, you went to school for biology, correct? And then how did you make that shift into the fashion industry?
Well, my dad, as I said, my father was a doctor, and since I remember, I was supposed to be a doctor, and there was no other career for me. There was no choice. So I did declare major as a anatomy and physiology major with molecular biology minor. And when I finished school, I interned with a friend of a friend who's a plastic surgeon, and I wanted to be a plastic surgeon and go back to Afghanistan and work on rebuilding, especially mine victims and people that were burned. But by that time, the war was over, and Taliban had taken over, and it was just I had lost that window that I was supposed to finish school and go back, and I interned with this guy that was a very famous plastic surgeon in Northern California. And I remember the first nose job that I watched, I passed out 4 times. Now, meanwhile, I was an anatomy major, and I could dissect a dead person with precision and eat a sandwich at the same time. And it never bothered me. So I thought I was going to be an amazing surgeon because I had really steady hands and I was very detail oriented. But as soon as you put the scalpel on a live person and the first drop of blood, I would be on the floor passed out.
Wow.
Okay. So it never got better. And then I knew that I wasn't going to be a surgeon. I didn't really like anything else in that field, in medical field. So what do you do with a 4-year degree? I went to get my PhD in molecular biology to do research. So by the time I finished my master's, I hated that job. It wasn't for me. It was very isolating. I'm a people's person. I like dynamic world. I like changes all the time. I like travel. My job was basically in a lab alone with a cap and gown, with a mask, with the goggles, under a hood for literally like 16 to 18-hour days.
Wow, that's not you.
It was just me and music and nothing else. So after my master's, I'm like, what am I doing this for? It's not something, that I can contribute to the world in any way because I didn't have a love for it.
That was not your calling.
It wasn't, I guess. And then I sold perfumes for a minute. I sold fashion for a minute at Macy's in San Francisco, then perfumes, then my roommate was a makeup artist at that time. Okay. And she wanted me to help her out at they call it event. It was like a 3-day type of thing. And she told me what to tell her boss. And I got the job. I was a painter and a calligrapher. So it was, I could paint. It was fine. I got the job. They were offering me $3 more an hour than the perfume counter. So I'm like, I'll take it. And so that's how I got introduced to makeup. It was between that and I have 6 sisters and I saw them get ready every day. So.
Yeah. Wow, it was on there in you. I mean, the being raised with poetry, I'm sure that you were also surrounded by other cultural elements as well. And I wonder what, like in your makeup that you do now today, what are the roots of that? I think I'm trying to connect it to Afghanistan perhaps, or growing up. What sort of, is it through paintings that you kind of take your inspiration? What aspects of the Afghan culture kind of inspired you to now for you to be?
Afghan women are beautiful. Okay. And I'm not talking about the ones today that are Instagram beauties. I'm talking about like real Afghan beauties that were like, they were nomad women.
No filter.
No filters. Exactly. It was, before the lips and before the eyes and before the cheekbones. They were, these nomads that would come in with like silver paillettes under their skirt, and they would make music when they walked. They would sell either, fruit, or they would sell, a lot of them sold dairy products like cheese and yogurt and things like that, but on top of their heads. So they had these amazing postures. And they would have this big thing on top of their head, and they would just pass through neighborhoods to sell stuff. And the only thing they wore was like, they had sun-kissed skin, coal in their eyes, surma, and nothing else. And that's my aesthetic. I try to push that on every client I get. So
Yeah,
one of them actually asks me always like, "Oh, you always make me have the Afghan eyes," because she's been in Afghanistan many times and she knows the culture, she knows the look, and she's like, "I'm so glad that you get it. You know what I'm doing."
Yeah.
So Afghan eyes is my thing.
Your thing, yeah. And I know a few days ago when we were trying to schedule, you were on a shoot, a TV, I guess, as you were doing. What are some of the projects which you kind of have been doing, and tell us about those?
I worked in fashion before, and then I didn't know the world of celebrity. I never really connected with them. I didn't know who they were, and but the more when I started assisting, I assisted a very famous makeup artist named Laura Mercier, who has a brand now, and the brand is sold all over the world. So I was assisting her, and she was getting pulled from fashion to do celebrities. This is when Madonna was touring, and she wanted her to go with her, and Mariah Carey was coming up, and it's a Celine Dion. Like she basically created all of the best looks in their videos, and so it was completely new. We weren't doing celebrities at that time because it was models in the cover of magazines, and I started in 1997 doing makeup in New York. So at that time, it was still, you'd still see models on the covers. Every once in a while, a movie star would be on a cover of a magazine. But that was shifting, and it was becoming celebrity. And these celebrities were looking at our portfolios or our this is before website or Instagram or anything, right? So they were looking, we had these books that would be sent to different offices. They were looking on magazines and catching the names that, who did the makeup for this fashion spread or who did the makeup for this cover. And then they would call the agency and request you. And the more I wanted to go towards fashion, the more celebrities I got. And it was frustrating because I didn't know that world, and I would go in and I was shy and quiet. Now you can't shut me up. But at that time I was really, really quiet. And I was, I came from a corporate world. I came from pharmaceuticals to a world that was very vulgar to me. It was, they were dropping the F-bomb every other sentence, and they were talking about what they did the night before with whom. And I was just like, I couldn't believe the conversations. So I was very shy. I would just do the work and come back. And I remember calling my agent saying that, this is not happening for me. I thought it would be a lot faster. It's just like, it's taking so long. And he's like, you're not memorable. You have to talk. You have to make them remember you. But that was like one of the best advice and honest advice that he gave me. And then I also didn't know who these people were, no matter how famous they were, because I didn't have a TV and I rarely watched movies, really. And even if I did, I didn't pay attention to the name of the star. I would go for the story, right?
Okay.
So it was that kind of a situation. And I remember getting a fax saying that I'm working with this woman the next day. And she was actually... that year, she was nominated for 2 Oscars, but I had no idea who she was. So I called the agency and I said, is she black, white, or, I just want to pack my bag with me to take. I just don't know what she looks like. And my agent laughed at me and yelled at me and said, you have to go and buy People magazine and Us Weekly and read it cover to cover until you know everyone. So that was my homework to learn. Wow. And that's how I was pulled from fashion to celebrity. And then I just got booked with all these actresses for years. Yeah. So now my projects are, COVID was, everything stopped. So there was no press with the celebrities. There was no opportunities. And I was asked to do a movie with a client of mine that I've worked a few times. And which was a very generous offer because I've never done a movie, and it's a very different medium, and it's technically it's very different. Mm-hmm. But she knew that I could do beauty. She knew I could do skin. And so I started doing that project, and I met some really amazing people in film. my friend Linda Hicks, who was in charge of makeup with her co-star, the man. She was so incredibly generous, and she showed me the ropes and what to do and what works for certain lights, and that because beauty light is very different than movie lights. Yeah. For example, I would give you an example, like if there's a shine like this, normal shine on the skin, on a movie camera, it reads like sweat.
Yeah.
So it's very different that way. So she was like, this is how you trick the camera with these things. So it was like, I really met generous people that were incredible. And what I found is also the movie set, everybody is a workhorse. Like, you have very long hours and everybody's pleasant to each other, and it's not ageist. It's not, you don't need to be cool. You don't need to be pretty. You don't need to be skinny. It's like everyone works and everybody's doing their job, and it's a very collaborative type of situation, which doesn't exist anymore in the editorial and in the celebrity world that I was in before. Yeah. And that really appealed to me. So, then I was offered another project by another client, and I took it last season, and now I'm working on the second season of that show. It's called And Just Like That. So it's my third TV show that I'm doing, and it's all been with HBO, and it's been a really nice ride.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, I was going to ask you, throw the names so people could kind of remember you as they're watching these shows.
Well, I did. My first project was Scenes from a Marriage with Jessica Chastain and Oscar Isaac. Okay. I did Jessica Chastain for that one, and then I'm doing the Charlotte character with Kristen Davis. Although she's not my usual client, I work with the Miranda character, whose name is Cynthia Nixon. But Charlotte's character's makeup artist and hairdresser wasn't available, so she basically offered us to her. And she graciously said, "Oh my God, I'd love to have them." So now we're doing her for the TV show, but we're working with Cynthia Nixon for her photo shoots and magazines and TV appearances and all that.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Wow. I mean, that's definitely a body of work. And what an interesting way of moving from medical sciences into this world. You definitely have the personality for what you're doing now, definitely. And you are
I don't know.
You're very memorable. I think whoever listens to this episode will not forget you. I wanted to kind of circle back and kind of bring it together with kind of your hopes and vision for future. You're definitely a character that came here at the age of 17, 18 and have had a wonderful career building up your life here. When you're kind of looking into the future in terms of identity or becoming whole or cohesive, and you may be in that journey already or have been at the end of that journey, what do you how do you, with the situation of Afghanistan being the way it is, which is unknowable and been at war for over 40 years, how do you what are your hopes? And then what are perhaps some of your activities maybe into the future or currently when it comes to bringing your two identities together?
Oh, I mean, the only way to really survive being away, uprooted from your culture is to be authentic to who you are and truly listen to your inner voice and work with what you truly desire and want. And to me, that's the only way to survive this. Otherwise, I often say that Afghans, we have, for the longest time, we have almost like a double personality. We have one personality at home with our families, and we have another personality outside with the outer world, especially if you're living in the West. So it's, and they're not, they don't go together. They really don't go together. So, the only way to really survive it is to be authentic and to be honest about who you are and how you live and what your desires are, and whether it's a career, whether it's a relationship, whether it's anything, like life basically kind of encompasses everything, and you need to be as authentic as you can possibly be. And I know within our culture, it's very difficult for a lot of people to, they're forced to marry early, they're forced to have a family before they're ready, whether you're a man or a woman. There's always that pressure that, you know, you got to get married, you have to have kids, you have to have, you know, 6 kids by the time you're 30, and you have to have either a doctor or a lawyer, or not even a lawyer. I mean, it's a doctor or nothing. Because even for me, it's like when I quit my career before, my mom was at least, you know, she was hopeful that I was going to academia and I could be a professor like my dad was. So at least that was comforting for her. And then when I quit and became a makeup artist, it was very, very painful for her. She was, and she didn't tell her friends for almost a year, until I was on a cover of an Afghan magazine. And that's when her friends are like, "Oh my God, this is your son. Like, this is how great it is." That was the only time that she actually, I saw a little proud moment in her eye. Like, she accepted what I was doing, that it wasn't just a phase that I was going through. It wasn't, you know, some kind of a whim that I was doing. So she took it serious that it was actually a career, because I was getting press about it. So it was that kind of and I get it. I totally understand it. I mean, this is how our culture works. But, you know, to be authentic and to be as honest as you can live, and combine the two worlds together is the only way to really truly survive it. Otherwise, I see so much pain and so much suffering in our community because of that. Because, you know, most women and men both live very different lives outside their families, and then they go to their families and they're completely a different person. They like the mannerism, everything changes. So, so authenticity, I think, is the most important thing. And my hope is that, you know, not only that our culture become more open and accepting of every career, every personal choice, everything about, you know, about their kids, like love them as your kids and not without expectation, right? So that's my hope, that, you know, the younger parents could be open to that. But also my hope is to go back to Afghanistan and work with especially with the education sector, with adult literacy, and bring up literacy and numeracy, and for everyone, but especially for women. And we're searching for possible ways to do that with a couple of my friends. We are trying to work on an app possibly, and take tech to Kabul and work with a accredited type of college, whether it could be Oxford or Lycée Français or one of those institutions that are international, and they know and they work like this, because they have institutions like that in Pakistan as well. I've seen it. So they can take their exams and then they would be graded abroad. So when they finish high school, they can apply to any colleges without being scrutinized. Well, this is Afghan curriculum and it's not up to par with, you know, with international curriculums. Right. So something like that would be ideal and a dream come true. So we're working on something like that, and we'll work within the framework of whatever Afghan politics are. I don't care what, you know, I mean, of course I care who rules Afghanistan, but, you know, if we have to work within the parameters of whether it's Taliban or Mujahideen or some puppet government, whatever it is, it's people come first. And then the government is secondary, and it's so we will work within their framework and try to be as cooperative as we can be in order to bring in some kind of change when it comes to educating the younger generation and the adults, because illiteracy is why we are where we are.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love your focus on education, and that's beautiful. And are there any plans of reinstating the project, the art project?
I mean, art is going to be definitely a part of it. Embroidery was only the only reason we started embroidery is because it's something that every girl learned as a child. So it was just the easiest thing to implement. But we have done a couple of times. We have done art therapy projects, and well, the painting is downstairs somewhere else.
I meant the embroidery. I meant the embroidery.
Oh, the embroidery. I mean, it's
the embroidery
my passion.
project.
I love embroidery, and I would love to bring that. But we did there's a project called Zarif Design, They do really beautiful projects as well. So with Zarif, we did a capsule project that were Afghan inspired. It's basically the clothing that I would normally wear, longer shirts, almost like an Afghan shirt, but it's different. It's a little bit twisted, so it's modernized. So we made a collection of shirts and shorts and pants that were very Afghan inspired, and that was very successful. We did it a couple of years ago during COVID, so that kept some people employed. And it was a very, very special project. So definitely either embroidery, which is labor intensive, but it's almost like doing a couture thing because it really is very hard to do. Yeah. But I would like to bring in industry in a way that it could be produced at a bigger scale to employ more people and to produce products that are faster produced, but also impactful for the economy and the well-being of people that are there. So, so definitely things like that is in the hopes. I'm always looking for that. So it's as soon as it opens up again, Afghanistan opens up again, and the sanctions are lifted, I hope I could go back and do that.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. Thank you, Matin John. This has been it's been so surprising, this whole conversation, because I went into this conversation only knowing about your makeup work, which is your body of work, and we discovered all your other wonderful projects, embroidery, education.
Well, with makeup, I mean, really, I have no business being in makeup, right? I mean,
exactly. I'm like, this was a makeup conversation, and we totally went. We talked about everything but makeup. We touched on makeup for a minute, I think. There we go.
Well, I always say, as an Afghan man, really, if you knew the culture, I have no business being in this business, but somehow I ended up here. So
yeah, you are. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I truly appreciate the time that you kind of put in having this conversation with me. Is there anything else you would like to mention before we wrap it up that you have left off?
Well, if any of your audience members is a app developer or software engineer, please contact me and let's make this app happen.
Okay, that's great. There you go. I hope they are. Maybe we need to interview an app developer next. That
would be amazing.
So thank you so much, Matin John, for being on the show. It was really a pleasure having you.
Pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor.
Thank you. And for audiences, if you're an app developer, definitely get in touch with Matin so you can develop their new app for education. And the rest of you, check out all the other conversations. There are 30-some plus conversations with other Afghans as amazing as Matin John today, in which we converse about their lives and their work and their thoughts. So thanks again, Matin John, for being on the show. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.